Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we have with us Edward Nevraumont, who is the author of Good Enough, Why Good is Better Than Excellent. Welcome to the program, Edward.
Hi, Mike. It's great to be here.
Hey, so, obviously this is an interesting title because I think whenever you hear things that your mind normally hears constantly, a certain phrase, and then you see something opposite, it's like, oh, wait a minute here. So to me, why good is better than excellent flies in the face of normal business thinking. So let's just get started with telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and then how this book title came to be.
Great. Well, why don't I even start with the book title? I think it's obviously controversial, and obviously I'm not saying that it's better to be worse than to be better, which is kind of what the title says in a way. I think maybe a more clear way of putting it would be it's better to try to be good than to try to be excellent. And I think that there's probably two reasons for that. One is this the risk of trying to be fancy. So a lot of people try to see excellence as this amazing, incredible things that are out there, and they chase the fancy. And by chasing the fancy, you end up hurting yourself more than helping. And the second thing is that this idea that if a little bit of something is good, then let's get more of that, and then that'll be excellent. And that's often a fallacy as well. And I think those two fallacies together have driven both individuals outside of business and individuals in business to run into all sorts of problems. And that's what the book is really about. And it looks at categories both in business and in personal life, but across many, many different things, everything from parenting to police officers trying to detect lies, to venture capital, to the arts, to education, wide variety of areas. And we see this pattern creeping up again and again and again, where people, by trying to be excellent, end up hurting themselves more than helping.
Do you think that's because of kind of the human psychology where we're wired to be paralyzed in the face of some formidable, massive, seemingly overwhelming task? So, you might think in business that this massive task of X, fill in the blank, is so, excellent or so massive that we just don't even do anything. Whereas if you shoot for good, then that feels attainable and you can make some progress toward that. Is that kind of where you were, the premise there?
I think it's actually more insidious than that. It's worse than being paralyzed. It's the actual activities you do to try to be excellent end up actually hurting you more than helping. And I'll give you an example. I was helping out a CMO of a Fortune 500 company. And this is a big company, obviously, but they also sell high price point products. And so what they do is they have a marketing funnel that generates leads, and then they pass those leads over to salespeople who end up completing the sale, because people won't complete the sale without talking to somebody. And he came to me and he said, "Hey, Ed, how do I integrate these two places? How do I integrate my sales CRM system with my marketing analytic tools so they can communicate back and forth to each other? So if someone's working with a salesperson and then they go back to the website and visit a certain page on the website, I can ping the salesperson with this potential client is showing interest in this particular area. You should call them and talk about that particular area with them so I can increase my conversion rates." He's like, "But how do I do that? My systems don't talk to each other effectively right now." And that's actually a really hard problem. It's a very difficult thing to do, to get all these systems to talk and communicate. And so I said to him, before I go there, let me ask you a question. When your marketing funnel hands a lead over to your salesperson, how long does it take that salesperson to call that lead back? And he said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, before you worry about this fancy, incredibly integrated software solutions for all your marketing and sales channel funnels, why don't you start by calling your customers back?" And I guarantee that if you're not tracking how long it takes you to call your customers back, then it's not optimized. And I've done enough work in enough different industries that know that even if you take 2 minutes to call a customer back instead of 30 seconds, your conversion rate is going to be hurt. And so you could call that excellence, which is calling customers back quickly, but I call that being good. It's really obvious that that's the right answer. It's just a matter of operationalizing and actually making it happen, monitoring it, making sure people do it, and rewarding those that do, figuring out when they don't, figuring out why, and then digging into those problems so that it doesn't happen again. All of that is kind of boring, everyday stuff, but man, it makes a huge difference versus this sophisticated, fancy integration of marketing and sales funnels down the way. The second one sounds fun. Sounds like you can put a fancy bullet point on your resume that you did this and you achieved this. But that first one is going to have far, far, far more impact. And so we're distracted by that excellence. We're distracted from good by going for this excellence.
I love that mindset, and it reminds me of kind of like blocking and tackling. In football, you got to learn the basics and then learn the basics and then learn the basics, and it kind of makes me think when you gave that example of the, like you described, lead scoring. If someone opens an email, they get a point. If they open an email and click the link in it, they get 2 points. If they open an email, click the link, and then also go to your website, they get 3 points. So you would want to focus more on the higher lead scored leads. But does it really matter what CRM, like the HubSpots of the world or whatever tool that you decide to use, does it really matter what tool you use that your salespeople are going to ignore anyway? Because lead scoring could be served on a silver platter to the sales team, but if they're not doing the rudimentary blocking and tackling of just calling that first lead back when they get it within a very short period of time, then they're not going to pay attention to the high lead score anyway.
Exactly. And then I'll give you another example on that lead scoring and a distraction from good. I was at a company called The Place for Mom, which was a senior housing referral service, and we were getting new leads in the door. And my predecessor just wanted to score those leads, and so we ended up buying services like Targus to go and get more information for those leads, so we would have a better idea before we even first talk to a lead. How good that lead was, how likely they were to actually move into senior housing. So we're getting information on things like, did they own a car, did they rent a house, and how many kids lived in the household, like all this information to improve our lead scoring. But at the end of the day, what you really care about is what are you going to do differently? And so the worst leads, the ones that this Targus and all these other tools were saying were our worst leads, what would we do with them? Well, we still called them back within 30 seconds because even those leads were worth us calling. So all the sophistication and work we put into lead scoring didn't actually change our behavior at all. At the end of the day, our options were, do you call the lead or do you not call the lead? And the answer was, we call the lead. Well, then the next question is, which order do you call them in? Well, the ones that just came in that just came in the door, you want to call them quickly, and in fact, you want to call all of them quickly. So the fact that you're taking 29 seconds to call one and 31 seconds to call the other is an insignificant difference and doesn't matter. But you've added all this complication into your system on this lead scoring, but you haven't actually made any difference in your day-to-day activities. And you're better to spend that time focusing on the day-to-day activities that matter than trying to throw more fancy stuff at the problem.
Yeah, and not only, you didn't mention the other huge aspect, which I know that it just needs to be left unsaid because it's cost. Those high-priced tools are very costly. So not only does it distract you, but it does take a big chunk out of that budget. So that's another aspect. But also, isn't it kind of hearkening back to like the lean, minimum viable product type concept where it's kind of like, don't wait until you have the perfect widget, jump and grow your wings on the way down. Get that thing out there or get that process out there. Get those calls, returned. And then after you are so proficient and so excellent at returning those phone calls and entering in conversations, does it really matter that you know that Mr. Johnson owns a Lexus or whatever, or does it matter that you're picking up the phone, making the phone call, developing some rapport, learning about them, seeing what they really need? Because really, the more information you know that you kind of hint that you know, it could become creepy in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And the minimum viable product is another interesting element of this. It's not even the minimum viable. It's trying to figure out what are the things that actually matter, and then focusing on those versus getting distracted with other things. Because it's many other things, everything matters. It's a question of how much it matters. And I'll give you a good example of this. Craigslist is probably one of the worst run companies in America. Everything about that website is broken. the international versions of Craigslist have EBITDAs in the billions of dollars, and Craigslist isn't even in the hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a terribly, terribly run company. And yet, they have really no competitors. They've really dominated that space for a long, long, long time, even though most things about it are terribly run. And why is that? Well, they figured out the one thing that actually matters, the thing that matters the most, is building out a marketplace, is having buyers and sellers on both sides. And once you've built that marketplace, it's really, really, really hard to disrupt it. Again, the example of a place for mom where I was at before, before I got there, they still had a lot of problems in a lot of areas of their business, which is why they were bought by a private equity firm to help fix those things. But the one thing they got right is they built out that network, the partners on one side and consumers on the other. And once you have that, the fact that your sales process isn't great, or your marketing process isn't great, or your website is terrible, you have bad PR, or your product isn't very good, all those things they're second order effects. And so you need to figure out what that first order effect is and get good at that. And once you're good at that, you can start worrying about the other things. But it's really easy for startups to get focused on all the cool stuff. Hey, having great marketing, having great product, great this and great that. What they really need to do is, it's almost like a search versus scale problem. A search to find out what the actual thing that matters is. And a lot of the lean startup techniques can be helpful for that, of figuring out what actually matters, what do consumers actually care about, before you try to solve everything.
Yeah, it reminds me of the quote from Bruce Lee, the late great martial artist, who is not really known for his kind of deep thinking, but this kind of is a really deep thought. He said, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." And that's exactly what you're talking about is, the 10,000 kicks once is give me the latest, greatest, give me the shiny object, ooh, we need to do this. But the one kick 10,000 times is these one or two or three non-negotiables, whatever it is, calling back or whatever that thing would be, and just doing it to the utmost. And I think that you brought up an interesting point about Craigslist, because probably if we could interview Mr. Craigslist, and ask this question, he would say he would confirm what we're talking about, which is, how many times over the years have you been approached by someone that says, you know what you need to do? You need to, and he said, thank you for that input, no. And or else we would have seen Craigslist offering everything, trying to become the next Amazon, but they're staying in their lane, they're doing what they're doing. Yeah, there could be tweaks or improvements or whatever, but they're staying in that lane. And I wonder how many times they have been approached by people to go, what if you added in, what if you, and what if you, and what if you? Sure. I think very easy to be distracted. I think in Craigslist example, they've had plenty of time to work on the second most important thing, and they've chosen not to for a variety of reasons. I don't think that was necessarily the right choice. But getting that important thing right the first time is absolutely important. In fact, your Bruce Lee story made me think. You've used sporting examples twice, so I'll throw a sporting story in for you. And that's this idea that once we know what's good, we think that we can just keep going along that same line, that using those same metrics to think about what's excellent. And I think one good counterexample to that is in the NFL. And so if you look at kickers in the NFL, the nice thing about kickers in the NFL is that they're very measuring their performance is very isolated. So how good is your quarterback? Well, a lot of that depends on how good your line is. For a kicker, your job is basically, for a place kicker trying to kick field goals, your job is very much just you. Like, the line matters a little bit, but very much a lot less than in other situations. Yeah, put it through the uprights. Exactly. Put it, and your success or failures are very clear too. Do you put it through the uprights or not? And even your difficulty level is very easy to measure. How far away from the uprights did you have to kick? And so super isolated jobs should be very easy to measure performance of the kickers. And people think that they do, because the kicker who's the most successful at putting things through the uprights in any given season tends to get promoted, tends to get higher promoted, tends to get paid more, longer-term contracts. And kickers who are unsuccessful at putting it through the uprights tend to get fired from the NFL, right? So it's clear that you can measure performance, and
we take action on that, and we reward the people that do well, and we penalize people that do poorly. All seems very obvious. And obviously, kicking is a skill, right? So at no point does anybody argue that kicking is like playing roulette, because if you or I were kickers in the NFL, we would be the worst kickers in the NFL. And we'd be consistently the worst kickers in the NFL. We'd be the worst kicker every single season they decided to let us play in the NFL. And yet, if you look at the actual kickers in the NFL and you look at their performance from season to season, there is no correlation from season to season in kicker performance. The best kicker in the league this year is no more likely to be the best kicker in the league next year than they are to be the worst kicker in the league next year. And the worst kicker in the league this year is no more likely to be the best kicker next year than the worst kicker next year. There's zero correlation from season to season. And that raises some interesting questions. Like, how could that possibly be? If this is a high-skill occupation, and we can see the individual performance attributes, we can see whether something's success or failure, how could it not correlate from season to season? And the answer is that once you get to be that good at kicking, we no longer have the ability to determine who's good and who's great. And it's partly the fact that we have a limited amount of feedback, right? And a kicker only kicks so many field goals in a given year, and there's enough random fluctuation, and the initial level of ability is so high that the difference in performance between the best kicker in the league and the worst kicker in the league is actually very, very, very small. We see that in 100-meter dash too, right? The top runners in the world, the differences are decided by hundredths of a second. The only reason we know that one guy is better than the other is that it's fairly consistent, and we can measure it, and we can see them race against each other. If you said, if our ability to measure a 100-meter dash was only to the second rather than to the hundredth of a second, and you couldn't see the people run side by side, we'd have no idea who the best kick runners in the world were.
Yeah, it'd be a big tie.
Yeah, right. We'd say, hey, we'd know who the top 100 runners in the world are, but the person who was number one versus the person who was number 100, we would really have no idea who was the best and who wasn't. And yet we'd probably find some way to rank them. That's what's happening in kickers in the NFL. Is we just don't know who the best kicker in the NFL is and who the worst kicker in the NFL is. We know they're all fantastic, the best kickers in the world, but we don't know their relative ability. And that happens again and again in all sorts of domains. That once you get to be good enough, oftentimes our ability to differentiate the people who are good enough versus the people who are rock star amazing goes away. And it doesn't happen all the time. It's not true for quarterbacks. It's not true for hockey players. But it's true for kickers. It's true for consultants. So McKinsey Consulting is one of the top, well, I don't know if they're the best consulting firm in the world, but they're the most expensive consulting firm in the world. So be that as it may. And they care about high-quality people more than they care about probably anything else. If their basic business model is hire really, really, really smart people and then charge ridiculously high rates for those people. So they care about getting those ridiculously talented people more than anybody else, and they're focused on analytics to do it. So the interview process for McKinsey is very, very intense, multiple rounds. They do what they call case interviews, where they have you try to solve problems that they've experienced on the job in like 30-minute sessions. They kind of walk you through it a little bit, but you're expected to basically solve these problems that you might experience as a consultant. So they do all that stuff right, which is make the interview tie very closely. Interview skills tie closely to the job skills. They have multiple people look at you. They analytically, they quantitatively give you a number on each one of those interviews. The interviews are super structured so that every interview is looking for the same things in the interview. And then once you're on the job, and then they reevaluate and they make sure that they try to make it better and better and better and more effective at matching how they do on the job. And yet, the interview scores and the performance on the job for McKinsey are still not correlated. There's no correlation between how well you do in the interview and how well you do on the job. It's the exact same situation as the kickers in the NFL. We can believe that an average person on the street is not going to do very well in a McKinsey interview and not do very well in the McKinsey job. And yet the people that do succeed in the interview, there's no difference between the person who sneaks in to getting a job at McKinsey and the person who nails the interview and is like a perfect candidate and is the best candidate they've ever had in the interview. Once they get to that level of ability, we are unable to differentiate good from great. Now, you could argue that they're all pretty great. I argue that they're all good enough for McKinsey. They're all good enough to be in the NFL. Where you draw that good enough bar varies from discipline to discipline and from situation to situation. But we have to recognize that there is a good enough bar. And then once you're above that good enough bar, we have to stop fooling ourselves that we can keep pushing it further and further and further and thinking that we're going to get better and better results. By paying the best kicker in the league, if you're an NFL team, your best bet is to find the worst kicker in the league and pay them a ridiculously low salary next year because you're going to get the same impact as if you hired the best person in the league and paid a huge salary.
That's all deep thoughts. And so that made me think of one last question, and we'll wrap up with this one. If good is better than excellent, after you establish a baseline of good, so if you're that McKinsey consultant or a consultant going into a firm and you take this approach of let's establish that baseline of good, when do you then circle back around to make that good baseline enhanced and a little bit closer to excellent?
I would say in general, once you're good enough in a certain area, you need to look for something else to be good at. I'll jump away from business and talk about personal. Scott Adams is a great example of this. He talks about whether or not how good is he at any given thing. Well, he says as a cartoonist, he's a good He's good at drawing, but he's not great at drawing. As a humorist, he's funny, but he's not that funny. He's not Jerry Seinfeld level of humor. In business, he's definitely not a Warren Buffett genius in business, but he has an MBA from Berkeley, so he's good. And his basic argument is that anyone with his level of drawing or his level of humor, his level of business skill would probably be mediocrely successful at any given thing. But by combining those three things and being a pretty good artist and a pretty good humorist and a pretty good business person, he was able to create Dilbert that no one else could create. And that's kind of what my answer is once you're good enough in something, go and figure out the next thing to be good enough in. And then the thing after that, and the thing after that, and the thing after that. And if you can be good enough in a whole variety of things, a couple of things happen. One is that through random luck, some of those things that you're good enough in, you'll end up achieving excellence. And secondly, the combination of good in many, many things is a really, really rare thing to have. And that rarity gives you a significant advantage in both business and in life.
Yeah, I think that I'll close with that final thought of that randomness of luck, because I think that it's kind of like the old saying, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. So it's not pure luck and you're sitting around watching TV going, wow, the phone just rang and I got this huge opportunity. It's you were the overnight success and it took you 10 years to get to that point. But I think that there's a big factor in with like any example, business, personal, it doesn't matter. When you have done the work enough to be good and to get to if you are given that platform to take your good characteristics and traits and qualities and continue doing that good, now all of a sudden, if you're in a larger platform, let's say that you were a small consultant at a small firm and you got that break to be working for McKinsey, like you mentioned. Now your same set of qualities and traits can now be amplified, and now all of a sudden you seem like you're all that much better because of the opportunity you're given on that platform. So I think that's a piece of where your good can be amplified to great, which is the platform that you were given the opportunity to work in.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this constant argument that happens in society, this idea that people who have achieved greatness, like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, how much of that is due to luck versus skill? And there's arguments on both sides. I think my argument is that it is both, but it's a very particular type of both. It's that you have to go out and do things to become good enough. And if you don't do those things, no amount of luck is going to help you. If you don't try to build something, there's no chance of you winning the lottery. If you don't make an investment, there's no chance in that investment blowing up. And so you need to figure out what those good enough things are. Venture capitalists know this. They spend most of their time trying to eliminate bad ideas rather than trying to find the perfect idea. They know that they can't predict what the perfect idea is. They can rule out stuff. And so by ruling out things, by doing things in life that are not bad, then there's a probability that you do really well and it blows up and you're very, very successful. And that's kind of why people who are very successful take offense at the idea that, hey, what you did was you just got there due to luck. And they say, well, that's ridiculous. Look at all these things I did in my life that led to my success. If I hadn't done those things, I would not have been successful. And they're both right in that you do all of those things, and some of the people that do all those things become very successful, and some of those people actually become moderately successful. By the way, no one becomes unsuccessful after doing all those things, but it's a matter of whether that difference is moderate success or extreme success. That's the part that's luck. But you got to do that stuff to become that moderately successful, that good enough first.
Yep.
And if you don't, then no amount of luck is going to help you.
Yep, you got it. Well, I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and these are some really fun thoughts. So what is the best way that people can learn more about your book?
Great. So the website is called begoodenough.com, and you can actually download the first chapter on there for free. You can pre-order the book. The book is not complete yet, but the first chapter is complete. You can get it for free, and I will continue to be blogging and live, adding live content as it gets written.
Super. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful to get to know you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.